The insects had a word for them, Hakar rumbled. The sound, a low vibration against the damp, spore-choked air of the ruins. He swiped a four-fingered hand across the datapad, its cold blue light illuminating the scarred plates of his jawline. A biolinguistic compound, difficult to render in galactic standard. He paused, savoring the condescension. The literal translation is something like, the ecological process by which a dominant organism self-immolates to poison the entire biome for any potential successor. The Gothari were poets, it seems. Our translator simplified it. Teth, his second-in-command, shifted on a pile of shattered ferrocrete, claws grinding softly against the dust. "Simplified into what, my hunt lord?" Hakar's lips peeled back from his tusks in a gesture of contemptuous amusement. "Ashwake." He spat the word. He deactivated the pad, plunging their small alcove back into the gray Rio twilight. "A legend born from incompetence. A swarm of hive-minded bugs gets their mandibles kicked by a pair of primates, and suddenly the whole galaxy is supposed to quarantine this mudball? Pathetic." "The reports were specific," Teth cautioned, his sensor stalks twicking as he scanned the skeletal skyscrapers leaning against each other like tired giants. "Kinflares from the frozen north who dropped ignited fuel tanks from civilian aircraft. Tunnel fighters who turned sewer systems into kilometers-long kill boxes. They didn't fight like warriors, they fought like a disease." "They fought like rats," Hakar corrected, his voice sharp as broken glass. "And you hunt rats by being smarter, faster, and more ruthless, not by crying to the Galactic Council." He clapped a heavy hand on the shoulder of Vorn, the hulking weapons specialist who had been silently cleaning the emitter of his plasma caster. "The Gothari were harvesters. We are hunters. There is a difference." Vorn grunted, a sound of pure, uncomplicated aggression. Let them hide. I'll make a new hole for them to scurry out of." From the shadows, a fourth Krail, the technician Ruck, spoke for the first time. His voice was thin, reedy.
"Scout drone has a heat signature, Hunt Lord. 3 clicks east, moving low and fast through the Babylonia rubble. Consistent with local scavenger patterns. Solitary."
Hakar's head snapped up, the thrill of the chase finally cutting through his disdain. "Our mission profile?" "Capture, Hunt Lord," Teth confirmed. "Alive, unscarred if possible. A trophy to prove the Ashwake is just another beast to be tamed." "Good," Hakar growled, the sound echoing in the concrete canyon. He flexed his claws, the keratin clicking softly. "Set the lures. Herd it into the plaza. I want to see this monster for myself." The signal was beautiful. A clean, steady pulse of Gothari energy, strong and pure, emanating from the skeletal husk of a downed swarm fighter half buried in what used to be a luxury hotel lobby. Mari Costa, moved through the ruins with the silent economic grace of a ghost. Every step was deliberate, every shadow a potential ally. The rubble of Rio was her home, its treacherous landscape a map etched into her muscles and mind. Years-running messages for the Favela defense collectives during the war had taught her the city's secrets. Which collapsed overpass could bear her weight? Which flooded subway tunnel held a pocket of breathable air? Which strain of phosphorescent moss meant the Gothari nerve gas had decayed into harmlessness? This hunt wasn't for glory, it was for a water purifier, the one servicing her small enclave in the high warrens of Morro de Babylonia had failed 3 days ago. Old Man Sousa, their mechanic, said its power converter was shot to hell, but a Gothari bioorganic energy cell? That could be jury-rigged to run the purifier for a year or more. It was more than a prize, it was life. She slipped through a gap in the fighter's ruptured hull, the air inside thick with the scent of charged particles and cinnamon from alien decay. The cell was right where the schematic she'd memorized said it would be, a smooth, gray, oblong device the size of a small mango, nestled in a cradle of lattice-spun circuitry. Her multi-tool made short work of the locking clamps. She had it. Triumph, hot and sharp, surged through her. She cradled the cell, its surface strangely warm, almost living. Click. The sound was tiny. A single pebble, dislodged from a pile of debris 50 meters away, tapping against a rusted steel beam. It was nothing. It was everything. Mariana froze. Her heart didn't pound. It went cold and still in her chest. A block of ice. That wasn't the sound of settling rubble. That was the sound of a footstep, a heavy one, trying to be light. She didn't wait for a second sound. She bolted. She burst from the fighter's hull into the graying light of the plaza, her boots skidding on loose scree. An instant later, a bolt of incandescent green energy sizzled through the air where her head had been, impacting a concrete pillar behind her. The concrete didn't just break, it flash-boiled, exploding outward in a cloud of superheated dust and steam. Her mind, honed by the desperate calculus of survival, processed the miss in a nanosecond. They weren't trying to kill her. A shot that powerful, that close, wasn't a miss. It was a warning, a herding dog nipping at the heels of a sheep. Capture. The realization was a jolt of ice water in her veins. She dove behind a massive slab of fallen wall, the ground trembling as another plasma bolt struck nearby. She had seconds. Her gear was worthless against them. Her wits were all she had. And the prize. They couldn't have the prize. Gritting her teeth, she shoved the smooth, oblong power cell into the only hiding place she could think of that they wouldn't scan on a live specimen. The act was a desperate gamble, a deep, bruising violation that made her vision swim with pain. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the fire in her gut, and sprinted again. But they were closer now, their forms resolving from the air as their cloaking fields disengaged. 4 of them. Giants. Covered in mottled, tough-looking hide, moving with a predator's fluid grace. The big one in the lead, Hakar, pointed a massive clawed hand. The brute, Vorn, raised his weapon, his patience clearly spent. A low hum filled the air, and a glowing net of blue energy shot from his weapon. It was a projection. The containment field snapped around her, constricting, lifting her from her feet. Her muscles locked, and she hung suspended in the air, helpless, a fly in an invisible web. Hakar approached, his steps slow and deliberate. He circled her, his eyes like chips of obsidian, taking in her patched-up jacket, her worn cargo pants, her scavenged multi-tool still clutched in her hand. A small scanner in his gauntlet whirred, analyzing her meager possessions. "A runner for the Moro de Babylonia warlords," he rumbled, the translator on his collar turning the guttural Krail into flat, toneless standard. He scanned her from head to toe, a profound disappointment crossing his features, the look of a collector who had hunted a rare beast only to find a common pest. He looked from her to the devastation around them, to the silent, hulking wrecks of the Gothari war machines. "Your whole planet fights like rats in a wall," he mused, prodding her shoulder with a single sharp talon. "This is the monster that broke a swarm? This is the great and terrible Ashwake?" He let out a short, barking laugh. "Ha! You're smaller than I imagined." The first thing Mari was aware of was the hum, a deep, resonant frequency that vibrated through the dark plates and up into her bones. She opened her eyes. She was in a cage, but not of metal bars. Walls of wavering, transparent energy boxed her in on all 4 sides. Her gear was gone, piled neatly on a workbench just outside the cage. Her jacket, her boots, her multi-tool. They'd stripped her down to her thin shirt and cargo pants, leaving her bare feet on the metal floor. The air was different, too. Dry, sterile, and recycled, and carried a faint, metallic scent that scraped the back of her throat. The gravity felt wrong, not by much, but a subtle, oppressive weight that made her limbs feel heavy, sluggish. The deck plates beneath her were unnaturally smooth, cold, and utterly featureless. a stark contrast to the broken organic ruin of her city. The cursory bioscan had been thorough but predictable. They checked for metallic weapons, for synthetic explosives, for known energy signatures from human tech. But the Gothari power cell was bioorganic, its energy profile almost indistinguishable from the baseline readings of her own body. They had missed it. The deep, bruising ache in her abdomen was a constant grim reminder of her hidden victory. Hakkar stood before the cage, arms crossed over his massive chest. Ruck, the technician, was tapping away at a console beside him. "She's a specimen," Hakkar declared, not to her, but as if dictating a log entry. "Proof that the Ashwake legend is nothing but a convenient excuse for Gothari cowardice. They are not demons, they are not a force of nature. They are bipedal mammals, carbon-based, fragile." He finally looked at her, his eyes holding a chilling lack of malice. His gaze held something worse than hate, the detached curiosity of a biologist studying a new insect. "We will take you back to Karaka," he continued. "We will study you. We will learn your weaknesses, your fears, your pathetic, chaotic tactics. And then we will return, not as harvesters, but as exterminators. We will show the galaxy how to properly scour a nest of vermin from a world they have infested." He turned to leave, his heavy footsteps echoing in the sterile chamber. "Ruck, run the full biological workup. I want to know everything. How much water it needs, its sleep cycles, its pain tolerance." Ruck nodded, not looking up from his console. "Yes, Hunt Lord." Hakkar paused at the doorway. "And secure the vessel for orbital departure. I grow tired of the smell of this planet." Mari didn't scream. She didn't rattle the energy bars. She didn't plead. Panic was a luxury, a fire that consumed oxygen and offered no warmth. She sat cross-legged on the cold metal floor of her cage and watched. She watched Ruck, the technician. His movements were spare and exact, but tinged with a nervous energy the others lacked. He was constantly checking readouts, his sensor stalks twitching at every flicker of a light, every groan of the ship's machinery. He was a creature of systems and order, and the unfamiliar environment of a new starship seemed to put him on edge. She watched the ship. It was a warship, functional and brutalist in its design. Exposed conduits ran along the ceiling, thick as her arm, labeled with Krail glyphs she couldn't read, but whose purpose she could guess. Power, coolant, life support. The lighting was stark, humming with a low, constant buzz. Then she saw it. Hakkar's order was being carried out. A deep, grinding shudder vibrated through the deck. On a far wall, the massive gears of a heavy cargo lift began to turn, preparing to haul some piece of scavenged Gothari wreckage aboard as a trophy. As the lift's power draw peaked, the lights in the room flickered. For a split second, the entire compartment experienced a brownout. And in that split second, the glowing wall of her cage wavered. The energy field, for a single, almost imperceptible instant, lost its cohesion. Mari's eyes, flat and observant, locked on to the emitter node at the base of the cage wall. It was a simple, robust piece of Krail engineering. During the flicker, a tiny spark had arced from its casing. She waited. She didn't know how long. An hour? 2? She sat in perfect stillness, conserving her energy. Her mind a placid lake on the surface, a churning vortex of calculation beneath. Finally, the grinding of the cargo lift began again. Ruck, engrossed in his diagnostic console, paid it no mind. Mari moved. She lay on her side, her back to the technician, pretending to sleep. With a slow, deliberate movement that cost her a wave of nauseating, tearing pain, she began the agonizing process of retrieving the Gothari power cell. Her fingers trembled as she worked, the object a foreign weight inside her. The pain was a grounding wire, a stark reminder of the stakes. Sweat beaded on her forehead. A low grunt escaped her lips, but she smothered it into a sleeper's sigh. Finally, she had it. The smooth, warm, oblong device was slick in her palm. It felt alive, pulsing with a faint organic energy that was utterly alien to the rigid mechanical thrum of the Krail ship. The cargo lift groaned, reaching the apex of its ascent. The lights flickered. Now. Mari jammed the Gothari cell against the cage's emitter node. The result was not a simple short circuit. It was a violent, catastrophic incompatibility. The raw bioorganic energy of the Gothari device slammed into the Krail's rigidly controlled power grid. It was like pouring water into molten steel. An explosive crackle of blue-white energy erupted from the emitter. The cage wall wavered and collapsed with a sound like tearing fabric, the air filling with the scent of burnt sugar and charged air. An alarm blared, high and frantic. Ruck spun around, his jaw wide in shock. But Mari was already gone. She had snatched her multi-tool from the workbench in the instant of her escape and slipped through the gap, disappearing into the dark maw of a maintenance corridor. Before the emergency lockdown shutters had even begun to slam shut, she was a ghost in their machine. "A power surge? From the containment field?" Hakar's voice, broadcast over the ship's internal comm, was a low growl of thunderous disbelief. "Explain, Ruck." I don't know, Hunt Lord," the technician stammered, his voice panicked. "The emitter it overloaded. The diagnostic reads like it was hit with an anomalous energy source, something organic, unstable." "Where's the specimen?" Teth's voice cut in, sharp and professional. "Gone. The surge fried the local sensors. I'm trying to find her on the secondary grid, but she's in the maintenance conduits. It's a maze in there." "I am on my way," Teth announced. "Deck 3, Section Gamma. I will flush her out." Hakar's command was swift. "Vorn, hold position in the cargo bay. Ruck, get those sensors back online. Teth, report when you have eyes on the target. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. I want to know how it did this." Mari pressed herself flat inside a cramped ventilation shaft, the metal cold against her cheek. She could hear Teth's heavy, clawed feet moving down the corridor below. But she wasn't just hiding. She had to work. Her multi-tool felt good in her hand, familiar. Above her was a thick, insulated pipe, a primary lubricant line for the ship's moving parts. She found a joint, a weak point. It took all her strength. Pry. The tip of her tool bit into the seam, prying it open just a fraction of a millimeter. A thin, viscous, nearly invisible fluid began to drip onto the deck plate below. It had the faint, sweet smell of burnt sugar, a scent that was already hanging in the air from the overloaded emitter. It wouldn't be noticed. It pooled on the floor, a slick, treacherous film. Teth entered the corridor, his plasma rifle held at the ready. "No sign of her," he reported into his comm. "Sensors are still spotty in this sector. I think the surge—" His foot hit the slick. For a creature of his size and grace, the fall was shockingly clumsy. His legs went out from under him. He flailed, his rifle clattering across the deck, and landed hard with a wet, sickening crack. Mari didn't hesitate. Directly above him was a heavy, magnetized maintenance panel she had unlatched moments before. It was meant to be lifted by a maintenance drone, weighing easily over 100 kilos. She gave it a final, desperate shove. It fell. Teth had just enough time to look up, his eyes wide with a horrifying split second of comprehension. The panel slammed onto his outstretched leg with the sound of pulverizing bone and tearing flesh. His roar of pure, unadulterated agony was not a warrior's cry. It was the shriek of a trapped animal. It echoed through the ship's corridors, a raw, brutal confirmation of her first lesson. She was already moving, deeper into the ship's guts. Hakar stared at the replay from Teth's helmet cam. He watched the scout enter the corridor. He watched him slip. He watched the panel fall. He played it again and again. It was stupid. A crude trap. A bucket of water over a door. A child's prank elevated to lethal efficiency. There was no technology, no advanced tactic, Just gravity and a slippery floor. He felt a knot of cold confusion tightening in his gut. This wasn't combat. "Get Teth to the med bay," he ordered, his voice dangerously quiet. "Vorn, sweep that entire section. I want her found." He turned away from the monitor and strode toward the ship's archives. The Gothari incompetence was beginning to feel less like a failure of nerve and more like a failure of comprehension. He needed to understand. He had dismissed their warnings as the hysteria of a defeated hive mind. Now, he wasn't so sure. He pulled up the Gothari battle logs from the Sol 3 invasion. Fragmented, chaotic data flooded the main screen on the bridge. File: DET-771. Gothari helmet cam footage. A factory in a ruined human city called Detroit. The Gothari swarm troopers moved in a perfect wedge down an assembly line. Suddenly, the air was full of flying objects. Not plasma bolts or laser beams, chunks of metal, engine blocks, heavy machinery, launched by jury-rigged kinetic drivers made from the factory's own pneumatic pistons. The Gothari, whose tactics were built around countering energy weapons and projectiles with predictable trajectories, were simply bludgeoned to death. Hakkar narrowed his eyes. No strategy, just using the environment as a weapon. File NBO-409. Tactical map of a sprawling city called Nairobi. The Gothari command had marked the dense, labyrinth slums as non-strategic, a waste of resources. Yet the casualty map showed their highest losses in those very sectors. Gothari patrols, lured into the maze, were cut off, isolated, not by a frontal assault, but by the systematic collapse of the environment around them. Bridges dropped, sewer grates detonated. Buildings, weakened at key structural points, were brought down on top of their heads. They weren't defeated by an army. They were swallowed by the city itself. Hakkar felt a chill crawl up his spine. File SIB-004. Audio log. The frantic voice of a Gothari wing commander. His transmission laced with static and the scream of failing engines. "They're coming in from below! Low-flying craft! Civilian designation! Dropping fire! They're firebombing the dropships! From fishing boats! From snow crawlers! We are over a frozen sea! There is nothing here! There are no military assets here! Who are these kin flayers from the ice?" The transmission cut out in a shriek of tearing metal. Hakkar leaned back, a deep-seated unease settling over him. He had been looking for a pattern, a doctrine, a grand strategy. He found none. He found only chaos. 1,000 different battlefields, 1,000 different tactics, each one born of desperation and perfectly tailored to its environment. There was no central command. The entire species was the command. The planet itself was the weapon. And somewhere, deep in the guts of his own ship, one of its people was now applying that same philosophy to his pristine, orderly Krail warship. Mari had found paradise, an engineering workshop, tucked away near the ship's secondary life support systems. It was a treasure trove, spools of wiring, diagnostic tools, spare parts for every system on the ship. The Krail were meticulous. They kept their vessel in perfect repair. It would be their undoing. She worked with a feverish intensity. Her hands moved with frantic purpose, stripping components, splicing wires, and rerouting power. Her mind drifted back to a voice, crackling over the scavenged global comms net during the war. An old engineer, a man with a thick Appalachian drawl, who had helped the Rio collectives remotely reverse engineer and sabotage the alien walker patrols. "Listen up, kids," he said, his voice a warm, staticky buzz. "Every machine is a city. It's got power lines, sewer lines, highways, and back alleys. And any city can be shut down if you know which transformer to blow. Any machine is a weapon if you know what part to break." She was building something more insidious than a bomb. A key. A master key. A system intrusion spike. Cobbled together from a diagnostic tool. A comms buffer. and the still pulsing heart of the Gothari power cell, a device that could plug into any terminal, any junction box, and speak the ship's language. A key that could hijack local systems, spoof signals, and inject malicious code. She was going to teach them the true meaning of a hostile environment. Ruck was sweating. A thin, oily film of it beaded on his chitinous brow. He was tracking the human, but it was like trying to catch smoke in a net. A sensor would ping her location in a power conduit on Deck 4, but by the time he focused the system, she was gone, leaving behind another localized glitch in the network. She was a virus, spreading through his ship. "I have her," he said into his comm, his voice tight. She's accessed a comms junction in the aft crew quarters." "Vorn, you're the closest," Hakar's voice boomed. "Go. Quietly this time." Mari slid the final wire into place. The intrusion spike hummed to life, the Gothari cell at its core glowing with a soft, sickly green light. She found the comms junction panel, pried it open, and slammed the spike's interface into the port. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship's internal address system, normally silent save for the calm, synthetic voice of the computer, crackled to life. But it wasn't the ship's voice that spoke. It was a chaotic, terrifying collage of sound, pulled from the Krail's own archives, the very files Hakar had just been studying. The defiant shouts of Detroit factory workers, a roar of "Wolverines" as an engine block flew through the air, the rhythmic pounding war cries of Nairobi defenders, a tribal chant layered over the sound of collapsing buildings, the static-laced, desperate last words of the Gothari pilot over the frozen sea. And underneath it all, a new sound, an audio file she'd found buried deep in the ship's specimen data, logged from a Gothari interrogation center, the sound of a captured human prisoner, a woman, laughing. A low, steady, unbroken sound of pure, defiant amusement that continued for 30 seconds before the audio feed abruptly cut to silence. The cacophony of humanity's rage and resilience blared from every speaker on the ship. It was the sound of the ashwake. Ruck recoiled from his console as if it were white-hot. His sensor stalks flattened against his head. The sound was a violation, an invasion of his perfectly ordered digital world by something primal and incomprehensibly chaotic. Vorn didn't bother with quiet. He kicked the door to the secondary generator room open, the metal groaning in protest. He had tracked the comms hijack to this location. The sound of Earth's uprising echoed crazily around the humming machinery. The room was empty. His eyes scanned the space, his plasma caster held tight. He saw the source of the broadcast, a small comm panel on the far wall, its cover plate hanging open. He moved toward it, his heavy boots clanging on the deck, eager to silence the infuriating noise. He was a warrior. He looked for enemies, for ambushes. He did not look at the power conduit terminal next to the comm panel. He didn't notice the small jury-rigged device Mari had left plugged into it, its Gothari cell pulsing faintly. As Vorn reached the comm panel, the intrusion spike finished its pre-programmed sequence. Its target was not the comms, but the generator's safety regulators. A single line of malicious code, elegant in its simplicity, instructed the magnetic containment field for the plasma conduits to perform a diagnostic flush. There was a low hum and then a roar. A torrent of raw, superheated plasma, the very lifeblood of the ship's power system, vented directly into the sealed room. The air flashed white. Vorn didn't even have time to scream. His last moments, a sudden violent spike in atmospheric temperature, a flash of blinding light, and the percussive thump of his armored body hitting the deck, were captured by the room's internal sensors and broadcast for a horrifying second over the still-active comm system before the link melted into screeching static. The cacophony of human voices was replaced by a sudden, deafening silence. It was just Hakar and Ruck now. The technician was trembling. his hands shaking so badly he could no longer operate his console. Hakkar stared at the main schematic of the ship on the bridge's view screen. A red icon flashed where the secondary generator room used to be, now marked Atmospheric Hazard, Catastrophic Failure. And there, a small blue icon representing the human. It was moving. He watched it, his mind finally horribly clear. She wasn't moving towards the armory. She wasn't moving towards the life pods. She was moving towards the shuttle bay. She was moving from junction to junction. A power conduit here, an atmospheric control nexus there, a structural integrity sensor over here. He felt a wave of vertigo. Her goal was not to escape the ship, it was to dissect it. She was taking it apart piece by piece, system by system, turning his hunter-killer warship into a death trap. The tactical map of Nairobi flashed in his mind. The Gothari forces, lured into a non-strategic market district, cut off and annihilated not by a frontal assault, but by the collapse of every sewer grate, every bridge, every support structure around them. The human fought the ship itself, not the crew. "Hunt Lord," Ruck whimpered, his voice cracking. We have to vent the corridors, flood her section with anesthetic gas or radiation. We have to—" Hakkar silenced him. A single, swift, powerful blow to the back of the technician's head. Ruck slumped forward over his console, silent. The blow was not struck in anger, but in grim necessity. An act of focus. The time for technicians and tactics was over. The hunt had been a failure. The specimen had broken the cage and was now dismantling the laboratory. All that was left was the duel. Hakkar looked at his reflection in a dark monitor. He saw not a glorious hunter, but the fool who had brought the plague aboard his own vessel. His crew, his hunters, had been dismantled by an exterminator, not defeated by a warrior, an engineer of collapse. "We are Krail," he snarled, the words a jagged rasp in the silent bridge. "Not insects hiding behind bulkheads." His honor demanded a confrontation, a true duel, not an extermination. He had to face the thing that had unmanned him, look it in the eye. He strode to the master comms panel, his movements heavy with resolve. "To the creature in my walls," he broadcast, his voice echoing through the wounded ship. "To the Ashwake. I am Hakkar, Hunt Lord of this vessel. You have proven your point. You are a worthy hunter. Your methods are effective." He paused, the admission tasting like ash in his mouth. "I am on the bridge. I invite you to face me. One hunter to another. No more tricks. No more traps." He walked to the ship's internal security control. With a series of decisive commands, he deactivated every automated defense system, every lockdown barrier, every security safeguard between Mari's current location and the command center. He created a clear, unimpeded path for her. Then, with a groan of protesting servos, he began to unlatch his heavy chest plate. His armored pauldrons, his plasma-resistant gauntlets, he let them fall to the deck with a deafening clang, until he stood in only his simple undersuit, his powerful muscles and tough hide exposed. He would face her not as a soldier in a machine of war, but as a predator, armed only with his natural strength and his claws. He stood in the center of the bridge, waiting, an invitation to the end. Mari arrived like a phantom, slipping through the main doors of the bridge, which hissed open to receive her. She was a mess, bruised, bleeding from a cut on her forehead, her clothes torn and stained with grease and something that looked suspiciously like coolant. But her eyes were clear, sharp, and utterly devoid of fear. In her hand, she held a length of sharpened conduit, a crude spear. Hakkar was a force of nature, a blur of muscle and fury. He lunged, she dodged. His claws tore through the air where she had been. She slammed the butt of her spear into an emergency coolant valve. A line shattered. Cryogenic fog hissed across the deck, slick and blinding. He roared in frustration, feet slipping on the spreading frost. He corrected. He lunged again. She sidestepped, letting his momentum carry him into a command console. Her spear came down, a crack, a shower of sparks. He recoiled. The dance was one of desperation. He was the storm, she was the rock that guided the flood. For every blow he landed, a glancing strike that sent her reeling across the deck, she answered by breaking another piece of his world. She shattered view screens, punctured plasma conduits that sent harmless but distracting jets of glowing gas into the air, and triggered meaningless, blaring alarms that added to the chaos. But he was an apex predator. He adapted. He ignored the distractions, his focus narrowing to a single point: her. He feinted left, then drove right, catching her off balance. He batted the spear from her hand, the metal pipe clattering uselessly to the floor. He cornered her against the main command console, the heart of his ship. His massive clawed hand shot out, pinning her by the throat, lifting her feet from the deck. His talons, sharp as razors, pressed against the soft flesh of her neck. He leaned in, his hot breath on her face. He had won the duel. Pinned, choking, the world going gray at the edges, Mari did something he didn't expect. She smiled. It was a ragged, bloody, defiant slash of a smile. "This is how we won," she coughed, her voice a strangled rasp. Blood flecked her lips. "This is what the Kothari never understood." Hakkar hesitated, his killing blow stayed by a sliver of confusion. "What?" he growled. "We burn our own houses down," she whispered, her eyes locking onto his. "Just to make sure you're still inside." As if on cue, the calm, synthetic voice of the ship spoke over the cacophony. "Warning! Drive core magnetic bottling field failure imminent. Catastrophic core breach in T-minus 90 seconds." The bridge lights bathed them in a pulsing, hellish red. A new schematic appeared on the main view screen behind her, a terrifyingly simple graphic of the ship's drive core, its containment fields visibly collapsing. Hakkar's eyes widened. He stared from the screen to her. The intrusion spike. On her way to the bridge, she had stopped. She had made a final visit to a maintenance terminal in a quiet service corridor. She hadn't been clearing a path. She had been setting the final trap. She had done more than dissect the ship. She had rigged it to blow. From the moment he had invited her to this duel, she had been counting down the seconds to mutual annihilation. She had given him his final, inescapable choice: kill her and be vaporized in the heart of a dying star, or flee in the single emergency life pod, a coward's escape, and leave her to her victory. Hakkar stared into the human eyes. He saw no bluff. He saw no fear of death. He saw only the absolute granite certainty of a creature that had weighed its own life and found it a fair price to pay for his defeat. He saw the philosophy of the ashwake made flesh. From his chest came a deep, guttural sound, not of anger or defeat, but of profound, horrified respect. He released her. Mari crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. Hakkar turned, and without a backward glance, he sprinted for the emergency life pod hatch. He did not run like a defeated warrior. He ran like a man fleeing a god. From the viewport of his tiny vessel, rocketing away from the dying warship, he watched it happen. The Krail Hunter, a marvel of engineering, bloomed. A silent, incandescent flower of white, hot plasma and vaporized metal unfurled against the gentle curve of the blue and white planet below. A new, temporary star in the Earth's sky. He activated his comm recorder, his voice stripped of all arrogance, all pride. It was the low, solemn voice of a prophet sharing a terrible revelation. "This is Hunt Lord Hakkar of the vessel Glory's Tooth. Final log." He swallowed hard. "The mission is a failure. The crew is lost. I have encountered the species designated Ashwake." He paused. The memory of her bloody smile burned onto the inside of his eyelids. "I hunted a monster and found myself prey to a philosophy. They are not a species that occupies a world. They are a planetary immune system. They will burn their own flesh to kill a virus. They are a self-inflicted wound that is always fatal to the aggressor." His voice dropped to a near whisper, a plea to the galaxy. "Do not touch their world. Do not enter their space. Do not even speak their name. The word the Gothari gave them, Ashwake, it is not a warning. It is a promise." He cut the transmission. Thousands of kilometers below, Mari had dragged herself from the dying bridge. The force of the life pod's emergency launch was a tectonic event, a violent shove that tore the crippled warship from its unstable low orbit, sending it into a final screaming plunge through the upper atmosphere. She scrambled toward an open wound in the ship's side, a gaping breach near the primary cargo lift. The section of hull she clung to was not Krail design. It was a massive slab of Gothari swarm plate armor, scavenged as a trophy and bolted to the outer hull. The slab, shaped vaguely like a monstrous pitted wing, was designed for atmospheric shear. As the warship began to disintegrate around it from the strain of re-entry, the Gothari plate tore free, with Mari clinging to its relative safety. The fall was a controlled catastrophe. The armor, doing what it was built for, screamed, a high-pitched shriek of superheated molecules sloughing away in a brilliant, fiery trail. It created a cocoon of incandescent plasma around them, protecting her from the worst of the direct friction as she rode the man-made meteor across the sky. It struck the waters of Guanabara Bay, not as a splash but as an explosion. The impact shattered the Gothari plate into a dozen pieces, the shockwave tearing through Mari's body and throwing her clear into the churning, streaming water. The wreckage hissed and sank into silence around her. Wounded, bleeding, bones aching with a deep, percussive agony, but alive, she swam for the shore. As she collapsed onto the muddy bank, she looked up. In the east, the new star she had created was fading from the pre-dawn sky, and behind it, the first clean rays of the sun were beginning to rise over the skeletal skyline of Rio de Janeiro.